Hello Horror Hounds, welcome to my anti-penultimate offering for Povember, the month of Edgar Allan Poe adaptations. We're going to be talking about the 1962 Roger Corman film, The Premature Burial, which I'd never seen before. Sort of stubbornly hadn't watched it because it was quote, the one without Vincent Price in it. So I got all sniffy and highfalutin and thought that this would be a great excuse to actually watch it. By this point, after The House of Usher and The Pit and the Pendulum, Corman had a bit of a falling out with AIP, or James Nicholson, Samuel Arkoff behind AIP, about profit distribution for the two earlier films. So he actually set out to do this on his own and got distribution through Pathé. One of the downsides, I guess you could call it, of that is that AIP had Vincent Price on contract, so Corman couldn't use him. But what AIP did was on the day before production, pretty much, they bought out Pathé. Just stick the knife into to Roger Corman and say, you're with us, son. But by that point, Ray Milland had been cast. I'm not the greatest fan of this film, and I'll explain why. But I will say right up front that it's not because it doesn't have Vincent Price in it. I don't think, honestly, Vincent Price could have elevated this film. Coming off the back of The Fall of the House of Usher and The Pit and the Pendulum, this film does seem once again like a recycling of very familiar themes that have already been explored in those first two films. And I think that Corman sort of got the message after this one, because he mixed up the content and the tone after that with Tales of Terror and The Raven, eventually coming back full circle with his final film of the Poe cycle, being Tomb of Ligeia, that I've already talked about. Once again deals explicitly with the same themes present in The Premature Burial, House of Usher and The Pit and the Pendulum, but I think by then he created a completely different approach for that kind of story. He felt energized by the move to England. That film, although it's a return to familiar territory, does feel energized, whereas for me, The Premature Burial just feels a little tired, a little worn out. He's ploughed that furrow now 3 times in a row, and it does show. The conceit, the concept, Poe's short story, as much as I love the short story, is spread very thinly across the length of a feature. No real attempt to try and magpie elements from other Poe short stories to bulk up the feature length of this story, as we've seen done time and time again, successfully, sometimes not so successfully, but not really in evidence here. So in this movie, it's a lady, Emily Galt, who's arriving at the mansion, the creaky old shadowy house of the long shadows that a visitor always arrives at in these movies. This time it's a lady, Emily Galt, who's seeking an answer as to why her relationship with Guy Carrel, the master of the house, has been cut off, and will broach no response but from him. His sister, who disapproves of her and the relationship, tries to dissuade her, but she wants to hear from he himself why the relationship's been broken off. And it's that old chestnut, the family curse, the cursed heritage, the cursed bloodline. He's convinced that his father was buried alive. As a child, became convinced that he could hear him crying from his tomb, so a very Poe-like theme, and is convinced that he himself has inherited this catalepsy that will put him in an unconscious stupor so like death that he himself will be buried. But what you've got with a film that's called The Premature Burial and a main character who's convinced that he's going to be buried alive. It's Chekhov's gun. It's the classic thing. If you show a gun in the first act, you have to fire it in the third act. Eventually, the dude is going to have to get buried alive. So you're keeping time. You're jogging on the spot until you get to the thing that you know absolutely is going to happen. And then when it does happen, things pick up, but too little, too late, and not enough beforehand. I mean, they add in a little bit of intrigue. Is it all in his head? Does he really have it? Is someone trying to drive him mad? Um, but all very sort of anemic versions of the storylines we've seen before to get to the point of the actual title of the film, to get to The Premature Burial. So, as I mentioned earlier, it's not simply because Vincent Price isn't in it. Um, Ray Milland, who plays Guy Carell, is really good in the role. He's adequate. I mean, he gives a really nice interior performance. You can see his obsession and his psychological fraying, and he plays that really nicely and really well. You do believe he's a man with a mania, and in the final act, he is afforded the opportunity to flip that after the event that we all know is happening. After that, he's able to flip the character, do new things, other things, be more proactive. He said obtusely than than uh, his reactive character in the first two acts of the film. Let's put it that way. Let's tippy-toe around how the film ends by basically just going, oh, there's fog, 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 so much fog. This film is choking in fog. I was expecting at some point Ray Milland to bump into the Wolfman out there amongst the trees and the mist, which would have been quite fun actually. There is a scene though set in the mist where Guy Carell is chasing after. Is it imagined or is it real whistling of grave robbers that we meet at the start? Uh, and that sort of scene of a man chasing through the mist after what might be physically something or might just be a manifestation of his psychological state. The way it was edited, just the feel of it, did have a real flavour for me of early Hitchcock. And Ray Milland also, at times, gave me a sort of James Stewart, Cary Grant vibe when they were in the hands of Hitchcock. His approach of taking established leading men and deconstructing them in his films in front of the viewer's eyes, either by deconstructing them psychologically or making them appear villainous. There's a part of me that wonders what Hitchcock would have done with this notion of being buried alive and the obsession of a leading man. I think he would have taken a gleeful, dark delight in sending James Stewart mad and then burying him alive. I think he would have had more fun and more play with it than we get in this film. And I love Roger Corman, but when you're sitting there pondering what this film would have been like if someone else had made it and someone else had starred in it, there's your sign that the film is losing you. Probably the most effective part of the movie is Guy's funeral, when he finally does get buried and he's alive and his eyes open in the coffin. He's got one of those little glass windows that is employed later on in the Tomb of Ligeia, but the dirt's coming in and you can hear his interior monologue, and no one sees his eyes open through the window. Probably the best bit, and after that it rushes to a nice histrionic conclusion, and then a sort of Scooby-Doo explanation, literally right at the end, a Scooby-Doo explanation of who did what and what's going on. There's a dream sequence in it, as there are in most of these Poe films by Corman. Carell builds a super tomb designed with like 3 different methods of escape, a stock of food, a specially built coffin that you can open from the inside, so that if the worst does happen, then he's thought of every eventuality to get out of his coffin and get out of the tomb and not die in it. Like the Chekhov's gun scenario before, what we have to do is we have to see that in action and see it all not work, and it's sort of before it gets blown up, because the story needs it not to be there, otherwise there wouldn't be an ending, unfortunately. So we see all of these contraptions and all of the best laid plans of this man fail, but in a dream sequence, and it's simply because we have to see it fail, because it's set up as a dramatic thing. So there's no real good payoff there. It's the worst dream sequence in these films that I've seen Corman do. All of the other ones illuminate something about the psychological state of the dreamer, or tell you something symbolic about the film that you're watching. I mean, some of them are great. The one in Tomb of Ligeia is amazing. There's one in Mask of the Red Death. Oh, will we be talking about Mask of the Red Death? That is brilliant. This one is really workmanlike. It's just there so that we can see everything go wrong, and then he wakes up, and then he blows up the tomb, because the existence of the tomb completely negates the end of the story that we have to get to. If the notion of being buried alive gives you the heebie-jeebies, and why the hell wouldn't it? I know it's just thinking about it creeps me the fuck out. Then, and I'm not just talking sequences like in Kill Bill Volume 2 or in The Serpent and the Rainbow, excellent as they are, or even in this film, great as it is. If you really want to watch a film about being buried alive, then, and it tells you something about this film, I'm going to recommend a completely different film as well. You have to watch Buried with Ryan Reynolds. It's a film I'm so glad I didn't watch at the cinema, otherwise I would have had to have walked out. As it was, I watched it on home rental, and even then I had to stop it twice to leave the house and take a stroll outside, see the air and breathe in some fresh air. It's intense. The entire film takes place inside the coffin that he's buried alive in. The film would have sent Poe himself into a frenzy. So a little bit of a misfire there, I'm afraid to say. They can't all be winners, but don't worry. As a taster, next time, for the penultimate video for Povember, we've got something that includes contributions by Roger Corman, Guillermo del Toro, Julian Sands, Sir Christopher Lee, and Bela Lugosi.